Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar for CPE, Transforming Vendor Risk Management Beyond Security Questionnaires. My name is Candace Smith, and I am BARR Advisory's Marketing Manager for Events and Brand Experiences. Today, joining me will be Larry Kinkaid, Manager of Cybersecurity Consulting, as well as Josh Schmidt, vCTO. I will have the speakers introduce themselves in just a moment, but before I do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about BARR Advisory. So BARR is a cloud-based security and compliance solutions provider specializing in cybersecurity consulting and compliance for companies with high-value information in cloud environments like AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. Sorry, that was a mouthful. A trusted advisor to some of the fastest-growing cloud-based organizations around the globe, BARR simplifies compliance across multiple regulatory and customer requirements in highly regulated industries, including technology, financial services, healthcare, and government. So with that, Larry, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and provide some of your background for the group here?
For sure. So I'm Larry Kinkaid, Manager of Cybersecurity Consulting here at BARR Advisory. I'm based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, so which is the Eastern time zone. I've been doing security and compliance for about 10 years. Started with Marathon Petroleum for 5 years, and then I spent 2 years at Domino's Pizza, and all different flavors of compliance from Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI, the CIS, in addition to, of course, being an implementer of SOC 2 Type 2 and ISO 27001 today. So looking forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. And Josh, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Josh Schmidt. I've been in technology leadership for the last 15 years. I've led a electronic health records company and an ed tech company, so I'm no stranger to the regulated industries. And now I've kind of stepped in to join BARR, leading their security engineering team as a vCTO.
Great. Well, thank you both for those great introductions. So today we're here to have an in-depth conversation on the nuances of vendor risk management with a specific focus on the shortcomings of security questionnaires. Our expert speakers today will discuss why traditional vendor risk management practices are broken and present innovative strategies to address these challenges head-on. Our intent is that you'll leave today having gained some practical insight on enhancing your vendor risk management strategy, fortifying your security posture, and ensuring a cyber resilience against emerging threats. So first, a couple of housekeeping notes. Let's get things started. A friendly reminder that if you are attending this webinar today for 1 CPE credit, you must complete the 3 knowledge checks that will come up via poll. Whether or not your answers are correct is irrelevant, but your participation is required for CPE. Please utilize the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit any questions that you have, and we will attempt to answer as many as possible during our time together. If we don't get to your question, one of the speakers will follow up with you directly after the call. And then finally, a recording of today's discussion will be provided after the event via email in case you missed something that you'd like to revisit or share with a colleague. So without further ado, let's get to our first question. So diving right in, Larry, can you start us off and explain why security questionnaires are part of the vendor risk management process? And can you walk through your perspective on the effectiveness of them as part of risk management?
Of course. So early on in my career, I started seeing the security questionnaire using as a mechanism of establishing trust, right? So you got to think traditional IT infrastructure. You've got the big wall, you've got a slew of tools, a 24/7 SOC, right? Like uh, you have all of this control and really this onus and responsibility of the data. And now with SaaS offerings and the cloud, now you're taking that trust and you got to establish it over here. So the questionnaires, I think what I would see is basically a copy and paste of policies. Do you follow our policies? This is our expectations that you're doing the same things without, I mean, mostly based on best practice, but essentially just like an extension of like, yeah, you have to at least protect the data to our baseline, if not more so as well. And I think that at least from my perspective on the effectiveness, I think it's dwindled because when security questionnaires first started, I think you would get, the the right people in the right situations filling them out. But now it's confusing questions, confusing context, whether or not there's a framework behind it. I don't think you're getting it's quite serving the same purpose that it used to, and has become more and more antiquated because of that.
Yeah, I agree with that quite a bit in the establishing trust, but I also think that it's important to establish a paper trail as an organization and to be able to gather the intelligence to understand what the vendor that you're getting into has to offer. Um, and kind of the effectiveness of the questionnaire directly relates to how intentional the asking party is and aligning with the core objectives of their vendor risk process. So if they're just presenting really broad questions that aren't relevant to the industry, then the vendor is in you're not getting a very effective questionnaire.
Ooh, and I think as far as like the continuum goes, like the vagueness and the ambiguity of a questionnaire, obviously you're not getting to the point because you're not really asking a question. But I think ultra specific questions too kind of defeat the purpose of like, do you do this the exact same way? And especially with like today's, I think more modern, cloud native functionality is what I like to call it. There's a lot of other ways to skin the cat, I guess, for lack of a better metaphor.
Sure. And I think it really shows in the experience of the people asking the questionnaire. The more experienced they are, the more they don't want to waste their time asking kind of needless questions to industries that it's just not relevant.
Sure.
All right. So, who should be filling out security questionnaires, and why is this an important part why is this so important to the process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the trouble with it is it's often not a single person. Um, Most of the time it takes a village to collaborate and really find the right answers for all the different sections of a security questionnaire. Um, and but the kind of the other important point of that is that you're putting on paper and representing what your company is doing. And so you have to have somebody in senior leadership who's really willing to read that through and to sign off on that and accept the risk that can present for your company.
Sure. And I think the way that I envision it is like, your questionnaires cover the whole CISO mind map. And I mean, ideally you have more than one person in each space. And then not only that, but you're also probably touching on engineering. And then you're also touching on sales with the functionality, if it's like part of the RFP. So yeah, you're not going to have one person that knows it all. And that, unless their job, I think, is dedicated to doing questionnaires. So you really traverse all of these different disciplines to get the right answers. But I think if I had to pick an answer, you're looking at the CISO as because they are responsible for security of the organization, or whoever the senior leadership is, the acting CISO of sorts. But if they're if they're the ones reviewing questionnaires before they're all going out, I think they have they're better. The time is better spent doing CISO-y things as opposed to reviewing these individual questionnaires on behalf of customers. So you're kind of stuck between like, well, how do you how do you ensure that the right eyes are getting on this?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I would also add that if you're new to doing security questionnaires, to go very slow and try and be really thorough. I would even say in most cases, you're going to be consulting general counsel and you're really trying to find what the correct answers are. But then once you've taken that time and you've formed your foundation, then using really good documentation systems, some AI tools that I think we'll probably talk about, uh, those can allow you to not have to duplicate that effort in the future. But the first time you go through it, it's really important to cover all your bases.
What are your experiences? Because I definitely have some where it's like a question don't understand. Um,
Mm.
I'm sure we've all been there.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two forms of that. So there's the question you don't understand because there's just a piece of knowledge you don't know, or a terminology that you're not familiar with. But then there's also questions sometimes that just aren't relevant to you. Um, some of these security questionnaires have existed for, maybe 20 years, and they might be asking about a tape backup technology that's been extinct for 10 years. And I mean, even today most people don't use backups, but it's important to understand the intent of the question. So tape backup, really they're asking, do you do offsite backups? Do you have some kind of resiliency plan? And so in a good questionnaire, being able to expand into those and answer it by intent rather than the wording can be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think that, just based on the actual context of like sometimes you'll just have a spreadsheet that you're filling out, and okay, I can put stuff here because I can just add another column. Or if it's laden with macros, okay, well I have to answer yes or no. Well, I don't feel like it's actually exactly no or exactly yes. And then of course, you've got your I guess SaaS tools that supplement and do those kinds of things. I thought it was a funny term, but we called it the Russian doll, in which or the Gremlin questionnaires, where you answer yes on something, and they explode 10 or 20 more questions based on the fact that like, oh, you say you do this, well, how do you do it? So it takes like a 90-page questionnaire or 90 question questionnaire and turns it into like a 300 pound gorilla. But the reason I say that though too is that sometimes I answer them in a way because I want them to follow up, because I want to have the conversation.
Mhm.
I feel that it's obviously we want to reduce friction in the process and demonstrate that we have a secure program as much as we can, but sometimes I want to have that conversation because I want to show that like, hey, I have the expertise and the knowledge and the general prowess to like address these things head on and explain to them, if they're looking for the spirit of something else within that particular question, maybe we just accomplish it in a different way. Or I think, Josh, as you said before, it's just not applicable to our industry.
Yeah.
So why
Well,
focus on that?
so you like what you brought up there, I think brings up a really good point that not every security questionnaire has the same intent. And I think you can really tell by the type of questions. Are they just looking to kind of check the boxes in a process that maybe they don't care that deeply about? Or are they really interested in understanding kind of that deeper intent, and even interested in having conversations to make sure that we are 100% in line in what we're doing, which those are two different or completely different relationships.
Yep. And I mean, I have it written down over here in like big bold letters. Context matters, right? Like I think that that's what we often ignore, and where the security questionnaire is going is that, hey, everybody's going to answer the same kind of like security questionnaire, and we have the same kind of NIST requirements and expectations as we would the DoD. It's I think it's something that I would like to share experience on. But have you ever gotten to a questionnaire where you're going through it, you get to this one, you're like, what, I really can't say that we do this because it's so specific, and I know it's gonna pop back out on the other side, and I really don't want it to, and I say no, and then they don't bring it up ever again. So you're like, you spent all this time stressing about like this particular subject matter, but it really didn't matter to them either, and I don't know why they're even asking it if they don't really care about it.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really good point too, that I personally have experienced on security questionnaires is is as I'm filling them out, and when I don't feel like I can completely say yes to a question, I take that personally. I feel like my system is somehow lacking in what they're looking for, and then that doesn't feel good. And but I really try and, be thorough, do the best I can. And most of the time at the end of it, it's very complimentary, where they appreciate that you've been so thorough. And I would say more times than not, I get complimented that, this is one of the better questionnaires I've read, in which you go through all that self-doubt, and then at the end it completely turns around, which is an interesting emotional journey for these security questionnaires.
Right. And I think almost a rabbit hole. I'll stop myself, but like it kind of is akin to like a clean audit report or a clean pen testing summary,
Hmm.
right? It's like that, I think does that make more questions if you have a complete, you've answered yes to everything on our questionnaire without any kind of semblance of drift from our expectations. Is that more of a red flag than if you actually answer honestly and say, no, we don't keep tape backups offsite because we leverage availability zones within the cloud.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think it's interesting too how much people are willing to kind of fudge the truth to get a yes answer. Where I know one of the big questions is, are you SOC 2 compliant? And most people are using AWS. And so, well, AWS is SOC 2 compliant, and I'm using AWS. So, by some transitive property, that means that, yes, I'm SOC 2 compliant as well, which, I mean, if I was writing the questionnaire, I would not view that as true. But
Mm-mm.
but you see it more and more how the good vendors are actually building that into the questions. So they're saying, are you SOC 2 compliant, but not specifically is one of your vendors SOC 2 compliant, but are you? And so it's just kind of this cat and mouse arms race to figure out how to best ask these questions.
Oh, and of course, as an auditor, I have to say that if someone asks me if I'm SOC 2 compliant, I have to say no because it technically isn't a compliance framework. It's a report against an attestation of trust services criteria. But now we're getting really into the weeds of like, okay, like if they're asking me this, they think it's that way, and I don't want to like ruffle their feathers. So do I just like I meet the spirit of what they're looking for, but I don't, do I
Sure.
take the opportunity to show off that I know with the SOC 2 and the intricacies of it, or do I, just like let sleeping dogs lie and again reduce that friction? So I don't know
Cool.
because
All right. Well,
you have to
Candace,
think about
can
it.
we
I'm going
Oh,
to pull you guys out of the weeds a little bit
okay,
here.
okay, yeah.
And we are actually going to go to our first knowledge check question. So I'm going to launch the poll now and read off the question and responses. If you have double screens, please be aware that sometimes the poll goes into another screen. So the first knowledge check question is, who should sign off on the security questionnaire? The response options are intern, office manager, senior/security leadership, or account executive. And I am just looking for about 3 more responses. Give you guys a couple of more seconds. 2 more responses. And remember, if you do want CPE, you do need to complete the knowledge check questions. All right, I am going to go ahead and end this question here. All right.
Wow.
100% response on senior/security leadership.
Or do we make these too easy?
All right. All right, and so with that, we're going to go into our next topic. So with regard to internal documentation and the security questionnaires themselves, what is acceptable to be asked on a security questionnaire and what's not? As a practitioner, how do you manage those conversations?
Ah man, it's like the auditor's favorite answer of it depends. But it truly does because it really depends on the context of the relationship. Everybody, and I think human nature wants to just like set things up as check boxes and like, okay, we get send all the questionnaires out and they all come back in and then we rank it based on, our arbitrary scores and whatnot. But ultimately, like it really depends on the context of the relationship. Are you handling sensitive information? Is it privacy related? Is it regulatory bound? Is it sensitivity of availability? Because that's a very different conversation for me than obviously like whether or not it's confidential information. So and it really depends, I think, on what information you have. So it's really industry dependent, I would say too. And that's where when I'm trying to sell services to clients, yeah, we can get, help you through your SOC 2 Type 2 journey and set up a demonstrable security program. what I really want to understand are your customer expectations. I want to read those questionnaires because then it gives me a feeling of like, okay, this specific industry really digs ISO 27001, or over here, oh man, they're really like into the weeds about I guess your risk management program, or like your obviously your availability because of what you do. So the context of the relationship, the services you're providing, and the industries that you go into really help do that. But I would say as far as the de facto would be SOC 2 and ISO 27001. But I also always recommend we got to get that executive penetration testing summary out there, diagrams. Depending on how deep in the weeds you are, we can do white papers, shared responsibility, documentation as well. There's really a lot I think you can do in there to really build that up. And then another thing that I do too is, I mean, obviously I'm as building their program, I'm also doing their third party risk management. So I'm either, reviewing their due diligence documentation of their vendors or sending out questionnaires, but that helps inform me, okay, like what other things are they providing? And I get ideas from that kind of stuff all the time, like, certificate of insurance is I think is another popular one that I got inspired by. So I use kind of all my different avenues to help kind of like build up my Rolodex of what would you call it? Like artifacts, right? So
Sure.
it
Yeah.
depends. Yeah.
I think about it from maybe the being an answerer's perspective a little bit, where I think the best companies, they they only ask relevant questions. They don't pile on thousands of questions that aren't specifically relevant to the relationship at hand. And then they also don't make me kind of needlessly duplicate my answers several times in several different ways. Oftentimes, if you're, SOC 2 or high trust, like you have your reports that you're providing, which answers a very good chunk of questions. And I think many of the good companies will take that into consideration and not force you to answer thousands of questions that you've essentially already answered. And then I think another thing that just a simple nuance is, rather than asking yes, no, or true, false only questions, is at least allowing for the ability to comment. So if I have kind of this ambiguous question that I think at the heart of it, I can say yes, but technically it's a no, that I don't know exactly where to land. If I have the ability to comment, I can just say, well, no, but here's why. And I can still feel okay answering, and that we're really in the end doing what's needed to be done.
And it really adding more the comment and the context there, it really gives you the opportunity to speak intelligently about the subject matter to kind of assure them that like, okay, I know what you're asking. I know what we do and how we do it, and I can speak intelligently about it. To kind of give them the assurance that, oh, okay, so it's not just as alluded to the past question, not just some intern copy and pasting out of a database or a spreadsheet of questions that they've saved or something like that. So
Yeah, and I think
hmm,
too, it's really important to note that sometimes, because of their own policies, they can't answer questions. They can't provide certain documents. I can't count how many times people have wanted us to share, our internal disaster recovery plan. And
mhm.
I mean, it has proprietary and sensitive information. I can't give you that. And so we ended up making a kind of a customer facing version of that. But at the same time, I think you should understand that, well, of course, the disaster recovery plan is going to have all sorts of sensitive information in it. And so what is it out of that you really need to see? In a lot of cases, it's just, do you have one? And so you know, it's just important to remember that you can't always give answers to questions that you're asking.
For sure. And I think what I find too, I feel like I have more of a leg to stand on if I have one of those other documents I mentioned earlier, though, too, because then I can say, hey, actually, if you go to this page within our report, it actually says that we have third-party assurance that this exists. It's tested
Yeah.
annually. It covers all the everything that it should. And then again, I mean, if they were like, well, we need more specifics. Does it include this? Does it include that? Okay, well, that's a very different conversation than does it exist? Because our attestation over here already says that it does, So
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
and
with you there.
sometimes I think you also have to be careful that, so I had mentioned the disaster recovery plan we couldn't share, but there are some people who just ask kind of inappropriate questions, like, what what specific things in your internal infrastructure are this, and just kind of these proprietary secret things that you
Mm.
can't share, and you should push back on that. Absolutely.
I hope it's okay. I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit because we've talked about this before. But what are your thoughts on providing the software bill of materials or the SBOM?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know how to answer that.
Right? I think it's context, right? Like, okay, does it make sense? I mean, if I'm already open source, maybe then that makes sense too. But like, what? I guess it also depends on the amount of leverage. Is it a big name asking for this, or is it just somebody seeing what they can get away with?
Yeah, I mean, and I suppose it's something to mention as well that usually the security questionnaires are coming from the sales process. And in that sales process, not every sale is created equal. And if you're up against a very huge institution that has some big unreasonable asks, your leadership team might ask you to do something unreasonable to get a sale. And I've seen that happen too.
Oh yeah, the pressure of the sale. So there's two things that I'm glad you brought that up because then it lets me talk about it. Is that I've seen where like security questionnaires will only be answered if you're on a certain tier of their offering or their
Yeah.
licensing, right? So if you're a starter, come on, we're not going to go through these motions and filling out this questionnaire. But if you're at an enterprise level, hey, we'll do whatever you want because you're in the enterprise tier, you're already supporting the platform in a way, and then everybody else because okay, we can definitely do that for you. And we understand how important security is for you. And I mean, well, now we're talking about like getting into the weeds, you could talk about the upsells on single sign-on or certain audit logs, but we'll save that conversation for another day.
Well, I think,
Oh,
Larry, that's like a really good segue into our next question because I think trust centers solve a lot of those problems. So
mhm, mhm.
maybe can we, Candace, do our next
Yep.
knowledge check and then we'll segue into that?
Yeah.
Good
And
call.
so with that, the next knowledge check is going to pop up on your screen. So which of these questions should not be answered on a security questionnaire? Not be answered. Do you maintain an information security policy that is reviewed annually? What are your password requirements? What's your company's cloud infrastructure password? And can you provide an executive summary of your latest penetration test? And we are looking for maybe one more response. I will give it another second here. Perfect. There we go.
Mark Rab.
Yep. Excellent job on not sharing out your passwords.
So you mean I shouldn't be logging into Root for my day-to-day activities?
All right. And with that, I will get us into our next talking point. So let's talk about tooling. What tools should organizations use to make this entire process easier?
Yeah, so I think right now there's kind of a big three in my mind. The first one is just good documentation. If you're using Confluence, Notion, even just a directory in Active Directory or Google Cloud, if you're keeping good documentation, that can go very far. I think you can run a very effective uh, security program on just good documentation. And then from there, you have some really cool tools that are adding and making that process much easier, which are the trust centers and then the AI questionnaire tools. And I think one of the things that beyond just using a trust center that I found in the best ones is the ability to personalize the views for individual customers. So you can kind of create unique security postures for every one of your clients. That's my favorite feature of a trust center. So what do you think of tools, Larry?
Um, Definitely, yeah, it is funny how like it seems like such a simple area, but there are different I think with the pillars within it. Trust center is a major one of those. And I love
Well,
the
maybe
idea
do you
that
want
like
to define a trust center? For I guess I'm not sure everybody knows what a trust center is. Maybe I should have started with that.
no, yeah, and I think it's a good call. I'm probably gonna have to define it another term though too. I call it a security package, but it's like all your documents that really demonstrate your program. It's the normalized artifacts that I've alluded to before. But the trust center is just a way to present those artifacts in a really like professional, polished way. It enables your sales team to share it as needed. You can have a public view for it, so that way, like if you have any prospective customers, it's lead generating because they can see, oh, well, they they're stepping with their best foot forward. They're already answering a bunch of our questions before we even have to ask them. Um, how do we, again, reduce the friction within that sales cycle to kind of show our put our best foot forward? I kind of like think of it as like a profile of sorts, right? And as you said, Josh, like you can have different profiles for different audiences. So that's what's really powerful about that. And then there's functionality within that, the shrink wrapped NDA, the watermarks. A big fan of a watermark. If I get a document with my email address watermarked into it, you can bet that I'm going to be a little more careful with it. Not that I wouldn't be otherwise, but got my name on there. So I got to do that. I know like AWS Artifact was one of the originals, probably there in their proprietary trust center.
I have seen a few trust centers now that have expanded to give kind of live monitoring tools
Uh-huh.
into various controls in the environment.
Ooh, ooh, okay, yeah. So or even just the integrations with your big CRMs and Salesforce and
Hmm.
HubSpot and those kinds of things. But um, what I think is really cool, in addition to the trust centers, is yeah, definitely the AI questionnaires and leveraging AI questionnaire automation rather, and then leveraging these tools in which you have like a proper knowledge base. And you talked about before, right? Who should be filling out the questionnaires? A team should be filling out the questionnaires. But if this team is enriching this knowledge base of sorts, and you're getting the right answers to the right questions and able to do them in a professional way, these questionnaires really are able to reduce the amount of time and effort and really the quality because you have consistent answers across the board, which I think is really important. Um, so
Yeah, so well, and then I was
yeah.
going to say too, I think on the AI questionnaire front, which really, I mean, we're just kind of entering into this next phase of the journey. I know having filled out hundreds of security questionnaires, the volume can sometimes get overwhelming. And from a salesman's perspective, often you feel guilty going and constantly asking for more and more of these questionnaires. And so some of these AI tools allow the salesperson to kind of self-service the
Yes.
questionnaires and get it kind of 90% of the way there, which one alleviates that ask burden, but also I think as a tangential benefit is it educates more of the company on the security postures of the company. And over time, the salespeople are able to absorb that knowledge and answer a lot of the basic questions themselves, which I think becomes its own powerful sales tool.
Exactly, right. And enabling the sales process through security. And then, I think I don't know if you found this as well, but like the sales team is typically scared to talk about security and they avoid it and they wait to the last minute and then you have to turn around the security questionnaire in a day because they want to sign the dotted line and you're the reason why it's being held up. I mean, the AI questionnaires help remediate that somewhat, but then you got to really think about it from the whole sales process from beginning to end, enabling your sales team to talk about security at least at a baseline and then speak to the trust center what's available there. But in addition to speeding up that whole process as well, I think is huge. And then another tool I wanted to throw in there though too that I think is complementary to the whole process is this compliance automation space
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
you also, I mean, do you have a risk register? Well, I do, and it's just a spreadsheet. Like, no, we actually have it. It's built here. It's maintained. It has, it aligns with the NIST. There's something really powerful about that. It really complements not only just the AI questionnaires, but also the trust center as well. So I think that's my trinity, if you will.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good.
All right. So let's switch gears a little bit and
Mhm.
let's discuss the legal precedents of security
Mhm.
questions. Can companies be held liable for what they put into a security questionnaire? Larry, why don't you start us off with this?
It's a great question. I'm not aware of any specific precedent, but the way that I look at it, I mean, if I had to do yes or no, if this was on a security questionnaire, I'd have to say yes. And ultimately, though, there's a lot of nuance to it because I think if you're lying or there's any ounce of like realistic negligence that can be proven, for sure, right? You know, you're openly like misrepresenting your program and your security controls and everything else. But if it's a bad question, which there's plenty of them, if it's ambiguous, if it's like there's so much, I think space here that like, do you really have a legal case if it's just like, hey, I didn't know what you were asking, or I didn't really understand, the context and the expectations here that you were trying to portray, which I think is the biggest, why I consider security questionnaires broken is it really doesn't serve the purpose of its intended benefit in holding, a customer or your vendor accountable. Josh, what's your experience
Yeah.
in legal
Well,
precedent?
I mean, what's interesting about these is they're reactive elements. Like nobody is getting, you know, into a situation where they're culpable for something unless some other event happens
Right.
that kind of precipitates that. When you look at the Solar Winds case that kind of recently came
Mm,
up, and you saw the CISO got charged with fraud. It wasn't necessarily specifically for a security questionnaire, but it's more about, are they honestly representing what's actually happening in their organization? And if the answer is no to that, then, regardless of if it's what you're telling the leadership team or what you're putting in security questionnaires, I think you have to conclude that you could be culpable in at least some way for that.
for sure. It, it- the term that I like to use is it's the shadow box program. It looks good, you got it everything. You can say that you're doing it, but are you meeting the spirit of what these are actually intended to do? And another thing, and again, why I think is really important to like, you know, uh, have FaceTime with client customers is that you it's speaking intelligently about it, but like the fact that compliance is a journey. I think like sailing ships is a cliche like analogy, but if you're just in the harbor, I know we've been watching a lot of Moana lately because my daughter's two, but you're not even past the barrier reefs if you're just doing the bare minimum and you've got just like check the box program. So in being able to speak to programs and show that like, hey, we have a roadmap, we have intentions to do more than what's just required, and then keep building up our SOC 2 Type 2 report to represent that and other artifacts as well. Like I
So
think that's also very representative of that. But yeah,
yeah,
the shadow box
I,
is where I don't want to be.
I think it's important too to think about it from the other perspective. So if you're the company doing the questionnaire and you're
Hmm.
actually looking to hold a company accountable, that it's probably not enough to just get answers out of a security questionnaire. That if it's something that's important, it's integral to your business, that you should probably build that into an actual contract rather than relying on the security questionnaires to hold a company accountable.
Exactly. I mean, what's more, I guess, what represents more culpability than the actual contract itself? And then that's where you document your expectations. Yeah, you can line it up to a framework and maybe throw in some like baseline requirements, but hey, what's the liability within an incident? What's your SLAs on availability, right? I mean, from there, then it's up to me to make sure that my program is designed in a way that I'm, 3, 4 nines of availability and that, I'm responding within 72 hours, or just knowing that like, hey, the sensitivity of information I have, like multiply that by my customer base, and that's how dirty it can get real quick. So that's why I mean that's more of the incentive to do security as opposed to just checking boxes based on questionnaires that I get. So 100% agree. And I mean I'm not going to cosplay as a paralegal by any means, but I review contracts for my clients, and I have a really close relationship with their legal counsel, in which I point things out. I don't like this language. Can you soften this? Like I don't know if we can really meet like what the spirit of this is, or here's how we do it instead. So I mean that's a really important thing, and I think I can tell which customers are more I guess pragmatic within vendor risk because they do include those information security writers.
Sure.
All right. And so with that, we're going to launch our final knowledge check question here. And so be looking for that poll right now. Can companies be held liable for what they put into a security questionnaire? We'd love to hear it from your perspective. Yes, no, or it's not that simple. All right. Looking for about 3 more responses. All right. Looking for one more response and then, oh, here we go. A little bit of a divide on this one.
And honestly,
fair,
this divide is the answer, right? The answer is it really isn't simple. And I don't think yes, no, or it's not that simple is a wrong answer. So it's, you know,
I mean, I think the right answer is not picking no.
yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
But yeah, it's something that, you know, it's one of those things that I try to really instill upon my clients and my team at large. Is like, hey, you know, the questionnaire, it serves more than just this purpose of like, is the deal going to close or not? Like, there's a lot riding on this, you know. So
Yeah. Well, and
All
I
right.
think it's a good segue.
Yeah, I was going to say. So we've talked a lot about what's broken with security questionnaires as part of the vendor risk management process. So what are some immediate solutions today that practitioners can use?
Yeah, I would say, you know, that first part about understanding why you're doing it and what it's for. If it's super important, get it in a contract. Don't rely on the security questionnaire. But in the spirit of this security questionnaire, only ask relevant questions. And if that means you have to make several categories of questionnaires, depending on the types of vendors you're dealing with, then I think that's appropriate. And then I would say as well, especially if you're using some kind of audited framework, like SOC 2 or High Trust, that you should align your questionnaire with that framework and how it's relevant to how you interact with the vendors. Just asking basic kind of gotcha cybersecurity questions, while it can, you know, make you feel good, it doesn't actually solve a real problem for your organization.
right, and I'm trying to think like. I kind of mentioned it before, so I kind of like, you know, bringing it back a bit is understanding the customer expectations, having the conversations with your customers. I mean, that really is where you're going to understand, you know, where the friction points are and what their expectations are. And I mean, even having just like a really like blunt conversation on like, okay, well, what actually matters to you? What ways can we make you feel better? You know, and I think that goes a long way, and as opposed to just being like, no, we're secure. We're you know, we have 100% guarantee that we're gonna be able to respond to anything, and that we're, you know, not gonna have any issues is unrealistic. And I think it's just it really defeats the purpose of what this you know, third party risk management space is. It's understanding that everybody's on their journey. We have to set expectations, and then how do we demonstrate that? So customer expectations frameworks and the like. Oh, and then I think another thing I mentioned though too before in passing, but it's this concept of shared responsibilities. Um, like Google Workspace, they have SOC 2 Type 2. Office 365 has SOC 2 Type 2, right? You know, they're ISO 27001. They probably have a really robust, lots of resources, lots of security, right? But just by using it, you aren't inherently secure. And my point being is that you, as the customer or the users, have an inherent responsibility of shared responsibility and configuring it to the degree that, you know, complementary identity controls the SOC 2 Type 2 like equivalent, but there's more to it than that. There's CIS benchmarks of like, here's a hardened Google Workspace tenant or Office 365, and there's actually a bunch of software out there now too, beyond just, you know, here's your EC2 instance that you have to harden. It's like, no, there's SaaS that you have to harden as well. So I think that's really like a missing piece within a lot of programs. It's like, okay, we're doing the due diligence aspect. We're putting, you know, reviewing the contracts and holding them accountable, but then we miss the mark by not actually doing what we need to do as responsible users.
All right. So thank you, Larry and Josh, for this comprehensive and thoughtful discussion. I'd like to spend the last few minutes of this call going over questions that we've seen come in from the audience. And so if you haven't had a chance to ask a question yet, please do so through the chat or the Q&A feature. And we've already seen a couple come through, so I'm going to go ahead and read these off. So Sarah asked, how effective or practical are golden questionnaires?
Ooh, man, I wish I could ask a follow-up question. You mean like your cake, your SIGs? I imagine that's what you mean by the golden questionnaires. Josh, what are your thoughts?
So in higher education, they have a tool called HECVAT, and I'm thinking she's asking about things like that, where the function is to only have to answer a single questionnaire across the industry. And I love it, and I think it segues perfectly into some of the other frameworks that exist out there. So we might all be familiar with FedRAMP, which is the kind of the federal standard that's used. But more and more states are starting to develop their own version of the ramp system because the FedRAMP is pretty intensive, and it's not necessary to go to that extreme length, but they still want a standard. And so as some of these individual states are creating their own ramp systems, this nonprofit organization called State Ramp has cropped up, which
Mm.
is trying to create a unified system across all the different states, and then you get kind of reciprocity into each of the individual state systems. Um, I am all for it and I love it, but the problem is that if the majority of your customers don't accept that, then you can often duplicate your work. But the more we can push the industry to standards like that, I think the easier this whole process will be for everyone.
And I brought Sarah on here in case we needed a little bit more clarity. Sarah, if you wanted to come off mute and
Hi,
No,
Sarah.
Josh knows where I'm going with it. So thanks, Josh.
So was that what you were talking
Yeah, I'm
about?
thinking more like, you have ultimately one collective questionnaire that answers
Yeah.
all the questions. And also to that same point, is it too much information if you do something like that?
Hmm. What do you think, Larry?
Um, I don't know. I mean, the specific use case of that specific golden questionnaire, but I can speak to, and I wish I would have mentioned in the cake and the SIG earlier because those are my go-tos for, here's where we start, and then those are, normalized. I mean, CSA, has the brand and the recognition and the authority to be able to do things like that. But I don't know. I mean, because it sounds like at least within this particular example is based on education. It's what education and the regulations that are therein care about. So I mean, it sounds like it should be appropriate and it should be the right amount. But of course, I imagine some industries are a little, I guess, more antiquated than others.
So, okay, so in that, I guess that last part of the question, when you're looking at somebody trying to do SOC 2 or high trust or ISO, um, and there's sections that just aren't relevant to their industry.
Mhm.
How do you address those controls?
Oh, so I mean, it depends. No, but like within ISO, the way that it's designed, you do your risk assessment, so you have your statement of applicability, but then what I've experienced is like, yeah, of course you can mark things as out of scope and based on your business justification. But someone's like challenged by auditors to say, no, you need to have this. Like, well, we don't have an office. Like, well, no, you have to hold your vendors accountable. So there's different representations and different understandings within, I think, your assessor within ISO specifically. But ISO gives you the ability to scope things out. SOC 2 Type 2 gives you the ability to carve things out and rely upon your
So and maybe
subcontractors.
maybe that's the real ticket then, is in these kind of golden questionnaires, that you leave the option to say out of scope and maybe to write a comment. Like that might be the
Exactly.
way to get around that oversharing or sharing things that are irrelevant.
That's
Okay, and
fair.
we've got a handful more questions that have come in, so I want to make sure we
Oh,
get
nice.
to. Are there any niche requests for documentation or frameworks that you have seen?
Yeah. It's funny, Josh. I thought it was more niche, but the Texas ramp was one that I saw like a couple months ago at this point. I was like, whoa, Texas, like doing their own thing over here. But then I saw that, state ramp in response to that. So it's becoming more normalized. But a lot of these things do start in kind of an organic space and then build from there. There's also the Trusted Information Security Assessment Exchange, TSAX. From what I understand, again, it's very niche, but it's like based out of the UK. It's very automobile driven, but it's like, again, an attempt to kind of normalize the expectations of the industry and do a questionnaire, a golden questionnaire. I think another one is I've seen the CREST certification on penetration tests. I think it's more popular in Europe than it is here in the States, but it's another way to validate that, hey, your pen test is doing what it says it does. So I mean, and again, it goes back, and I feel like I'm being a little redundant here, but the customer expectations are really key in understanding, okay, what drivers and what things are going to provide the most, most trust, extension of trust within a compliance framework.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, in that same vein, I've seen requests for penetration test results, or even audit materials, especially when you're talking about maybe a larger, more established institution who's pursuing a vendor that's small and really doesn't have a big compliance footprint. Like they might create an ad hoc audit to round out that vendor risk management process.
Ooh, and then it's funny you say that because like this is some suggestions I've had for clients that like have had the what do you call it, the right to audits put into the contract, because again, like the idea of putting in something in contract where your client can just visit your office and audit you to whatever standard or expectation that they have is a lot to sign off on. So then they always throw in there that like, oh, you throw in like an hourly like a charge, like based on like, okay, we can do this, but add charge to the client based on an hourly rate of this. Now you're turning security into a profit center.
So we actually
Sure.
had a question come through from Julie about what are your thoughts on right to audit clauses, and have you ever seen these exercised instead of questionnaires?
So
Yes.
I hate them. I I would do anything possible to get it written out of the contract. But there have been a few times that the client's been too large, or we were just too new and unestablished, and we didn't have kind of the authority to push back on that, or we've had to accept things. I personally have not been involved in being audited externally like that, but I imagine it could be painful.
Yeah, I mean that's the alternative, as I said before, is turning into a profit center and then throwing in like, well, we'll do it, but we're going to charge you an exorbitant fee, or you have to be on this tier in order for us to even like consider it. But yeah, no, I try to get it written out, and again, it depends on the nature of the relationship, the context, the services you're providing, because like there's some clients of mine that are more of like platform as a service, so they only have a handful of clients. So if they do right to audit, well, honestly, I kind of understand, because the sensitivity of what we're providing is kind of warrants it, right? And
Right.
and if we did have to entertain that for a year, yeah, it'd be painful, but it's feasible because of the customer base. But if you have 500, 600 clients in a SaaS platform, could you imagine if they all exercise it at once? It's just not feasible. So you gotta set up
Sure.
some guardrails there and really come up to like a conclusion of like, well, we're going to continue to maintain our trust center, which has everything that you may need. If there's something specific, we can address that in a different way. But yeah, I generally try to soften them as much as possible.
Right, and this will serve as the final call for questions. We do have one more. If you do have one that's burning and would like to ask it, get that submitted. But Darnell wanted to know, do you use anything like security scorecard.com to monitor vendors, or do you have any recommendations?
That's a good question. Josh, I can go first.
Yeah, you go ahead.
So yes, but I think that one thing I'd always be careful with anything, and even like there's the security scorecards that try to quantify risk based on their what would you call it, like um, novel risk scoring methods and everything else. And then you've also got, I think, like you can do your automated questionnaires. I'm gonna throw out some names like OneTrust and UpGuard is another big one. CyberGRX, right? Like they're a little more their questionnaires and their expectations are more proprietary, is the word I was going for. But nothing's a silver bullet, as I think the thing I've warned. yes, it's a great, understanding of like, hey, if they're able to keep these things up to snuff and address these things, then the rest of their controls should probably be pretty mature. But it's not the end all be all. Is the only thing I'd caveat with like a scorecard or a bit site or a risk recon. But I do find a lot of value in, yeah, hey, I throw in the domain and I got a good understanding of like, all right, do they maintain their DNS health appropriately? Is their domain protected, and I guess all of the other I guess nuances of those kinds of things. But um, again, I think the spirit of that I would like to take a step back on. Every tool is not a silver bullet, and you got to understand that it's behind the users that are using them and maintaining them, and everything takes some tuning and love in order to actually like provide value. So
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add on that. I don't know. I know we're kind of getting right up on time anyway, so I'm not going to add in like not not useful additions to that. Oh, you're on mute, Candace.
I try so hard. So before we wrap up, is there anything quickly that you feel is pertinent that the attendees should know?
I
We
don't
sell?
know. I think it's important to try your best and to do things in good faith, and generally speaking, that's enough.
and I think not looking at the customer questionnaires or customer expectations as I've alluded to before as okay, I gotta do these or I lose, or it's like a life or death situation, and all the pressure that entails. Use it as help to help inform your security program. What I always tell I what I do is I set up like security committees and I do like weekly meetings with them. But within my weekly meetings, I say, okay, we're seeing a lot of questions about quarterly phishing simulations. Maybe that's something we should start doing because it's a best practice, or maybe we should up those to monthly. And then, hey, we're doing a quarterly user access reviews, or actually, I like quarterly, but maybe you're doing biannual or annual. Let's try to make stiffen up or tighten up these controls a bit for based on timelines, but also introducing new controls and requirements as well because your customers are giving you a free fodder to enable you. So I don't know. I tend to take those things and I kind of build my own programs that way. So
Awesome. Well, with that, we are going to conclude our CPE webinar for today. Thank you to everyone for attending and to our experts for sharing your years of experience, insight, and being transparent with us. We hope you found this information valuable, and please watch your inbox for the email with a recording of this discussion. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining.
thanks, Candace.